So I think in the meantime, everyone is joining. Let me just go ahead and again talk about the whole program. So thanks a lot, everyone, for joining. This is the third session, which is a hands-on session today. And as we have gone ahead and shared with you in terms of all the challenges, which we'll be going ahead and doing it together, Jared will talk more about it. Just to jump on the schedule again, we are in the second week of the program, and today's session is a hands-on session and this particular session will be a 2-hour session, and together we'll go ahead and solve a series of challenges today. And then after this session, you will go ahead and receive a Tableau Prep quiz, which you have to go ahead and work on and submit it by Friday end of day. And after that, next week, again on Monday, we have a call in which we'll go ahead and kick off the hackathon, in which Jared will talk about the data set, which we have to work on. And after that, you will literally go ahead and work on that particular hackathon. And in between, we will organize some data doctor sessions just to help you in whatever queries or doubts you have in that use case. So without further ado, I will hand it over to Jared. Jared, over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So I know the first two sessions, we kind of just did a broad overview of Tableau Prep, what it is, why it was built, and then just some of the general quick features that are available to you, some of the menu, quick cleaning and grouping and splitting options. So today, this is the good stuff here. We're going to really get into things and go through it together, learn how to apply it. And so we selected a series of prep and data challenges that are specifically geared towards people that are using Tableau Prep for the first time or really just trying to reinforce those fundamental skills. And so the first one that we're going to start with is the week 1 challenge from 2021. And so I believe those were just posted in the chat. So we're going to go through at least 4. We're going to go through at least the first 4 weeks of the 2021 challenges. And then depending on how long that takes us, we can move on to the last 2 challenges from this year. So that would be week 27 and week 28 from the 2022 challenges. And so all of these challenges are geared towards new users. Now, you don't see, Emma, you don't see, it looks like Sagar posted some of those prep and data links. Those aren't popping up in the chat.
I think we are talking about your screen, Jared, over here.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I haven't started sharing my screen yet. But yeah, so I was just kind of giving an overview of what we're going to be looking at. So I'll go ahead and start sharing. All right. So when you go to the link for the 2021 week 1 challenge, this is what you should see. You could also just go to prepanddata.blogspot.com and you'll see this as the opening page. And so what you'll see is the challenge index, and this is where you see the list of all those challenges. So in the challenge index, again, we're going to be looking at the first 4 weeks. So week 1, 2, 3, and 4 from 2021. And then depending on how much time that takes, then we'll take a look at week 27 and 28 from 2022. So 2021. This is typically what these challenges look like, right? They'll kind of prepare you for the scenario and then give you some, for the challenges like these, the sort of beginner challenges, they do also give you a couple of reminders, some resources, maybe how to perform specific tasks, and then just a series of steps on what you need to do for the data set. So Let me see. So this challenge here, when we come down to the prompt for week 1's challenge. So we've got a CSV file, and it looks like it's got order ID, customer age, bike value, existing customer, a date, and then a store dash bike column. So it's an orders file. We have our requirements here. So this is the nice thing about prep and data and why I like to recommend it for, I mean, obviously for prep, but for just data preparation in general, because it's really clear what you need to do. And sometimes these requirements are like more specific, or they'll kind of actually guide you and say, use the grouping function or do a join. But then sometimes as you kind of go through to more of the advanced challenges, they start to get a little bit more vague, which really forces you to kind of apply that critical thinking. And so like, what would you do to really get it in the proper state for to get the desired output? So here we've got our CSV file. So the first thing we've got to do is grab our CSV file. So there's this kind of hyperlink here. So if I click this, it will take me to the Google Doc. And then you should be able to just click File and download a CSV. And again, this is the purpose of this session, hands-on session, is the intent is for you to follow along, ask questions. If you get stuck somewhere, we can kind of troubleshoot that together. This is where we're, really going to apply some of the things we've been learning to help you get more comfortable with Tableau Prep. So I downloaded this file. And then I'm going to open up Tableau Prep. The link, Sagar, do you mind posting those links again? Okay, there you go.
Yeah,
Awesome.
I've just done.
All right, so I opened up Tableau Prep, and I'm going to connect to my data source. So the Connect to Data button is up here. I'm going to click that, and we downloaded a CSV file. So I mean, if you downloaded it as a CSV file, then you would click text file over here. But if you downloaded it as an Excel file, then you would click Excel up here. I downloaded it as a CSV, so I'm going to connect to a text file. So here in my downloads, I can see that 2021 week 1 input. So I'll click that and click open. All right. So again, a couple of things that we talked about with our input step. When you connect to, at least when you connect to one file, because you do have the ability to connect to multiple files at the same time. But if you just click one file that you're connecting to, then when Prep establishes the connection, it's going to automatically bring that into your canvas here. And let me zoom in here. So Prep went ahead and brought in the input step here to our canvas. And we can see over here on the right side, we've got, 6 fields. So we've got order ID, customer age, bike value, an existing customer indicator, date, and then the store dash bike column. And over here in the options, we can see that it's separated by commas, and all of that stuff is already set for us, so we don't got to worry about that. We're not trying to do any unions or anything like that. We're just working with this data set. Cool. So now let me go back to the challenge prompt here. And so the first thing we need to do with this data set is we need to split the store dash bike column into 2 fields, one for store and one for bike. And so you can see down here in the output that it should look like this. We shouldn't have that store dash bike column anymore. So let me open Prep back up. So the first thing that we would do then to start applying some of these changes is we would add a clean step. Now, whenever you before you add any steps to your input step, you're going to see this dash, 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 and this kind of a box. And if you hover over it, it's going to say, or it's going to kind of light up. And so when I click this, it's going to automatically add a clean step. The reason for that is just because most of the actual cleansing operations are going to happen here in this cleaning step. So that's why they make it really easy for that to be the first step. Also, since you can't, if I click here on the input step, it does give you a preview of these fields, but I can't see the actual row values. So typically the first thing that you usually want to do is preview some of those row values. And so that's why they just kind of put it there as the first step. But I could have also just clicked the little plus button and then clicked clean step. All right, so we should all have a clean step here showing us the row values here. And the first thing we wanted to do, split the store and bike column. So again, there's two ways we can do this, right? We could, actually there's three ways we could do this. We could, once I click this column and it gets highlighted with that blue highlight, then the options to split are here. And so we've got automatic split, we've got custom split. And so this column is simple enough. If I kind of look down here, right, I can kind of preview here and see that there's no, like all of my values here look pretty uniform. So I could do automatic split and that should handle my data pretty fine. Now, like I said, I know that's an option. I don't have any reason to not trust it. I just, I like to think about when I go through these challenges, I like to think, you know, how am I going to account for the problem I'm solving now? And then what if new data comes in? Like, does this flow solve the same problem as new data comes in so I don't have to come in and change it? And so that's typically why I go for custom split, just because I have more control over that and I don't have to kind of keep checking it. Like, what if a new value for store and bike was added and it happens to have an extra hyphen there and mess up the way that it's splitting? When I do custom split, I don't have to worry about that. So I'm going to click custom split here, and then your prompt will pop up. And so the first thing it's going to ask us is how we want to separate our data. And so we want to separate it on the hyphen. And so we just enter that here into the text box. And then it's going to ask what we want to split off. So we could say we want to, if we leave it how it is, split off the first field, the first one field, then it's only going to give me the first value before that hyphen. So it's just going to give me Birmingham on this first record. And it won't give me the actual second half of that, which would be mountain. So I'm going to say I want all fields. So it's going to look at the hyphen and it's going to give me all fields, meaning what's before it and what's after it. And so then once I have that set, I entered hyphen here in the text box, I clicked all, and then I'm going to click split. And so now we've got two additional columns here on the left side. We've got store dash bike dash split 1, store dash bikes dash split 2. One of those contains our store names. One of those contains our bike types. So now that we've split that, if I look again at my challenge prompt, oops. So over here on the challenge prompt, when I kind of take a look down here at the desired output, I don't need that original field, that original store dash bike field. And I also need to rename my split columns so that way they make more sense. So this field over here, the one that we originally split, it's now unnecessary, so I'm going to remove the field here. The column that contains our store names, I'm going to click this and rename it to store. And then the column that contains our bike types, I'm going to click this, double click it, and rename that to bike. So we're getting closer, right? All we've done is click. We haven't written any calculations, but we're getting closer to the desired output. Now, when I click over here on the changes, again, if you kind of want to reverse engineer, understand how some of those menu options are cleaning things, it will show you those calculations over here. And then if you edit it, it shows you the calculations here. So we can see exactly what Prep did to split the columns. And so when I said there was 3 ways to do it, the first way was automatic split, the second way was custom split, or I could have come in and just created a calculated field and written that split out manually. All right. One thing too that I do want to touch on that I was meaning to talk about in our first 2 sessions, and it's kind of an important thing, is the change order. So the one of the bigger advantages of Tableau Prep is when you think about kind of applying changes in Tableau Desktop, like if you want things to operate in a certain order, it doesn't really work like that. Everything's kind of happening at the same time. While there is the order of operations, which applies filters in a certain order, that doesn't necessarily always do what you want it to do, as far as like if you had a calculation, logic for a calculation that needed to first this happens, then this happens, then this happens, then this happens. Tableau Desktop doesn't really process the calculations in that way. And so with Prep, all of these changes that you see here, if you kind of look over here, there's this very, very, very faint line kind of tying these 2 changes together and tying these 2 changes. And so when you apply changes in Prep, they actually happen in order. So these changes aren't all happening at the same time. First this happens, then this happens, then this happens, then this happens, then this happens. And the reason why that's important, and that's you can use that to your advantage, is so I've got this, when I come back up here, right? If I click this first step, you can see that the store dash bike dash split 1 column is created. And so what happened here was when I clicked custom split, first Tableau Prep created this calculation, and that's why you don't see the split 2. But then when I click here, it created the second calculation. And then when I click here, now that column disappears. Then when I click here, now that column gets renamed. And then when I click here, now that bike column gets renamed. What I usually do when I'm cleaning up data is it's really useful to be able to create a column and then basically create a second step that's performing additional logic in the order that you want it to be applied, but it's replacing that same step. So I'll try to find an example of exactly how to walk through that, but just keep in mind all of the changes you make in Prep happen in order. So you can create a calculation, and then if you no longer need the fields that were required to create that calculation, you can remove them from the data set, and that calculation, that field you created, is still going to be there, because what Tableau Prep does is it creates the calculation first and then removes the fields. So it gives you good ways to modify your data, but then still remove everything you don't need. All right, enough sidetracking. So let's go back to our prompt. What do we need to do next? Over here it says we split the bike, the store, and the bike field, right? We did that. So now we need to clean up the bike field and leave just 3 values. We need to leave mountain, gravel, and road. And again, these beginner challenges are nice because you see the little help link next to each of these steps. So they really want to help you understand how to do these things, and they provide you the links to the help documentation on how you would perform some of these specific tasks. Now, if we look at the bike field, we've got 8 values there. So the little 8 here next to bike tells us how many values we have in the column. And here we can see we've got a couple of misspellings here in the column. Now we solved that, when we were going through our examples by using the grouping functionality. They have a functionality specifically for grouping based on similar spelling or common characters. And so we're going to come up here to more options, the little three dots right here. We're going to come to group values, and then we're going to go based on spelling. And I don't have to adjust the strength of it. It looks like it did a good job and grouped it into those three values. And so I'm just going to click on those just to make sure that it's grouping correctly. So here in my gravel group, I've got the three values that should be associated with gravel. Here in mountain, I've got the two values that should be associated with mountain, and road, the three values there. I could also tell that by looking at the distribution bars here, right? Like this is showing me, this has got kind of half of the values that these two have. So now I've grouped it. That solves the second requirement for our data set. Now it says create two different cuts of the date field, quarter and day of month. So if we remember, there was some pretty easy ways to provide those options. So I need quarter and month, super easy to do. I can come over here to date. So I click on the date column and highlight it. I'm going to click duplicate field up here in the little bar. In the column date -1. So I got duplicated the date. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to click the little more options icon, the three dots. And since this is a date type, it gives me the option to convert dates. And I'm going to select quarter number. And then now I can just rename this to quarter. Perfect. Didn't have to do any complicated calculations. It just converted my date for me. Now, if I come back, the next thing says I need day of month. Okay. So I'm going to come and click date over here on the far right again. I'm going to duplicate the field again. On the date -1 column that popped up, I'm going to click the three dots. I'm going to go to convert dates, and you can see there's an option for day of month. So see, they've thought about these things, like what are some common transformations that would typically happen here, and how can we make it very easy? How can we make it self-service? So day of month here, I'll click this. Perfect. And I'll call this day of month. All right, getting close there. The last requirement here is to remove the first 10 orders because they're test values. All right, so if I look back at my data set, I've got an order ID column, right? So here in my order ID, I can see that the first 10 orders would be order IDs 1 through 10. And so I want to remove those from my data set because those are test values. So I can click up here on the three dots next to order ID. I can click filter. And I can say range of values. And so basically I want to say that I want everything past the first 10 orders. And so the way I would do that is I would click minimum and say, so when I click minimum, it says include only values greater than or equal to the minimum. Well, I don't want order IDs 1 through 10. So if the order ID is greater than or equal to 11, that will remove the first 10 orders. I click done. And then you can even see here, I started with 1,000 orders. Now, after I applied the filter, there is only 990 left. And so again, the profile pane here is really good to help you continue to monitor, validate your data as you go through it. All of the little icons here at the top corners are showing you changes that you've applied to each of these columns. And then the values there show you how many unique values do I have. And then over here in the top left, this shows you how many total columns you have. So you've got 9 columns with 990 total rows. So I think that's it. Let me see. If I look back over here on the requirements, we wanted 8 fields. Okay, so I've got an extra field here. Let me look back, see what I got. I should have quarter, day of month, store, bike, order ID, customer age, bike, value, and existing customer. What do I have? Oh, it looks like I don't need the date field anymore. Got it. So I'll click date and remove it. Perfect. So this is what we should look like. And another thing, super important, helps your prep flows become more usable, more interchangeable, is the documentation here. So I'm going to rename my step here. I'm going to click it. I'm going to say split and clean because that's what's happening here. I'm splitting a column and then cleaning up the rest of my values. And then I can put up to 200 characters here. And so I like to be as detailed as I can. So I'm going to say split the store, or yeah, split the store dash here, split store dash byte field into one column each. Duplicate date field.
Okay, Jared, can you repeat that order ID part? I think some of them has missed it.
Yep, I'll go back to there. All right, so you can see here, I'm just describing exactly what's happening in this step because part of tools like this, right, is transparency. What is actually happening in this flow? What transformation is occurring? So the more detail I can get here, I understand exactly what's happening here. And then if I were to have to hand this flow over to somebody else to manage, they can easily pick up and see what's happening. So I'll go back in and I'll go back up to the order ID to show what happened there. So part of the requirement was to remove the first 10 order IDs. So I've got order IDs 1 through 10 here. So if you come up to the order ID column, click the 3 dots, then you'll have the filter option. Select range of values. And then we want everything after the first 10. So we're going to use a minimum filter to say what is the minimum value that should be here in this column, and then it will return everything that's greater than or equal to that value. And since we want to exclude the first 10, we'll put 11 here. And that's it. And then we don't need the date column here, so I'm going to remove that again. And then I see a couple of questions. Let me see how to pop up chat here. Okay, perfect. Okay. So
I can read out Jared for you. So
yes.
one question which Michael is asking, we did all the changes in one clean step. Is this recommended or should we promote multiple clean steps, naming and annotating them for specific changes?
It's a great question. This is really more of a design choice, and it's dependent on how many different people are going to be looking at this. So if it's something that I'm doing for me, like a personal project, I'll kind of try to condense everything I can and use as few steps as possible. But if it's something that more people are going to be looking at, it's going like you're not going to be the only person working on it, or maybe it's even a flow that's being used to generate a pretty high visibility data set, then it's probably better to split some of these things out into more steps so that way people really understand all of the different things happening and you're kind of keeping all of those things separated. One of the things that I hear often about like kind of the differences between learning Alteryx and Tableau Prep is that Alteryx does keep everything, like all filtering is in one step and all certain types of cleaning operations are in one step. And so some people kind of that's easier for some people to learn exactly what to do, how to do it, because it is all, you can only do certain things in each step. And so prep, because you can do so much in the clean step, sometimes it is better to kind of split things off. So we could have had two steps here, one that was handling the split, and then one that was handling, actually we could have had three, one handling the split, one handling the date conversions, and one handling the filtering, just to very explicitly show here's everything that is happening. Especially if you're going to be using the description field here because you're limited to 200 characters. If there is more happening than you can describe in those characters, then it might also be a good idea to use more splits there. I'm not sure exactly what kind of a effect that has on performance. I wouldn't think very much. But another thing to keep in mind is Tab or Prep does kind of cache your data and your changes at the individual step level. So when I click this step, you can it's kind of hard to see because it's happening pretty quickly. But there's like these little flowing white bars that kind of happen there. That means that Prep is kind of processing it. And so now that I've clicked and loaded my step, any changes that I make here, it's all going to be processed in this one step. If I add a new clean step and started making more changes here, then it's going to process here first and then process here. So again, it's not really going to make a huge difference until you start getting into really, really big complex flows. But that's where you would kind of have to go in and start optimizing and seeing what can be reasonably combined, what needs to remain separate, and things like that. But that was a good question. I also saw somebody say the day of month is showing values between 0 and 32. So the distribution graph here is trying to show, all of the values here. And so there is a 0 and a 32 on the graph. But if you actually come up where it says in the 0 to 2 bin, there is one value in the bin. And if I click it, all of my day of month values down here are 1. None of them are actually 0. It's just what this did was it created a bin of values from 0 to 2. And then if I go to the end of it, it created a bin of values from 30 to 32. And that's because it's a histogram with bins with the bin size is 2. And so it had to start at 0 and it had to end at 32. But when I click down here on this last bar, I see values of 30 and 31 down here, but there is no 32. All right, the assignment shows it should be 990 rows, but I have 933. Okay. So the only filtering that we did was here on the order ID. So what should have happened was, actually, here, wait, let me pull up the chat real quick. I have 990. So Vicky, when you applied the filter, does your filter look like this, where it says keep values greater than or equal to 11? Oh, so there was a value of bikes that was excluded. Okay. Let's see. I see another question. Can I use prep output as an input of your database? You can. Prep does have the ability to write to database. So if I were to click output here, so I'm going to add an output step. You can see I've got options here. I've got save to file, publish data source, or database table. So if I click database table, then there are these options here. So these are the only supported connections. I know there's obviously other tools out there, but if MySQL is one of those connections, so you can use Prep you can use it as your, you could technically use it as an ELT tool, right? So you could connect to MySQL, do some transformations, and then push the output back into a separate MySQL table. Typically, when I finish one of these challenges, I usually do add an output step just so it's there. So this is like a finished flow. Then you can kind of leave it as is. You could name it, right? So I could, instead of calling it output, I could name it Preppin Data 2021 Week 1 Solution. All right. And there we go. That is our Week 1 challenge. Cool. So again, super simple. We just did some splitting, converting dates, all things that we can do by clicking. And so now we can move on to the second challenge, unless there's more questions on this one. I do see a question from Vignesh on web scraping. You can do web scraping in Prep. I think there are more options that support it in Alteryx. So as far as which one is it simpler in, I guess it really depends, right? Because if you're familiar with Python and R, then it is very simple in Prep because you can add, there's this script step here. And so you can use Python or R to kind of connect to the web APIs and pull that into your Prep flow and then continue to clean it from there. Now, I don't use Alteryx very much, but from my understanding, there are quite a bit of tools that you can use to pretty easily pull some web data down. So it might be easier in Alteryx, but if you're familiar with Python or R, then it's pretty simple here in Prep too. Okay, let's move to the next one. All right. So I'm back in my Prep and Data page. I'm just going to click the little back arrow here. And I'm going to go back to the challenge index. And I'm going to find 2021 week 2 bike store sales. So I'm going to click on challenge. That will bring up my scenario. Hey, someone built their first prep flow. Good job. That's what it's all about. All right, so this is a continuation of sort of the week 1 challenge and the week 1 skills. And so that's why I like this set of challenges, because it kind of builds upon what we've done each time. And so now, let's see. It says we're going to take our skills a step further and do some aggregation, and we're going to do some calculations. Let's see. They've got some help links here. Here's the challenge. We are looking at different brands of bikes in our stores. We need to understand what the most popular sellers we need to determine what are the most popular sellers, and do the customers of different brands have the same experience to other customers. We are creating simple summaries this week to get quick tabular view of the answers. If you want to visualize the data to highlight those trends even more clearly, go for it. So they give you an open-ended prompt. Once you clean this data, you could visualize it if you want to. Yes, here, I'll go ahead and post the link here in the chat. There you go. So I see, so you have one observation related to the date column. What would that be? I'll continue on while we wait. All right, so we've got our scenario, creating simple summaries, trying to understand most popular sellers. So let's click on you can either click on this one CSV of bike sales here, or you can click on the input the data here in input data. Why does the date format change when we upload the file in Prep? day, month, year. Oh, okay. So I guess that is a good clarification. Carl Alchin, JD Martin, they are the two main folks that run the Prep and Data challenges. They are from the UK, and so all dates in these challenges are in the date format, in the UK date format. So that's why it's day, month, year. So yeah. And I think it might also be a prep thing. I'm not sure if prep recognizes what region you're in and kind of tries to format based on what's most common there. So like for me, in the US, month, day, year is the most common format. So usually when I input dates into prep, they are month, day, year format. But I know the US is tries to be different for some reason. They're difficult. So I know that it's probably more common to look at it in day, month, year format. So that might be why. There might be prep might be kind of taking the location and formatting it that way. So we're going to click input the data. That will bring up our file here. I've got a little download over here on the top right hand corner up here. So I'll click download, and it's going to automatically download as a CSV file. So now I can open a new instance of Prep Builder. I'm going to click Connect to Data up here in the top left. I'm going to click Text File because it's a CSV, so it has to be a text file connection. And then I'm going to click my week 2 input. All right. So we've got 7 columns here based on the little indicator here. We've got 7 fields. And I'm just going to go ahead and add a clean step. Here, let me zoom in again. So I'll go ahead and add a clean step to look at my data. So we've got bike type, store, order date, quantity, value per bike, shipping date, model. Also, as you get more comfortable with prep, feel free to work ahead of me and then kind of check to follow along and see if you are doing the right steps. All right, so let's look at the prompt. First thing we do, clean up the model field to leave only the letters to represent the brand of bike. So Vicky, remove numbers. Yeah, let's try that and see what happens. So if I click on model, we need to remove all of the numbers. Or yeah, we only want letters. So if I click the 3 dots, hover over clean, and click remove numbers. Okay, so I've got all of the numbers are gone, but now I've got these slash marks in my model field. I don't know if we want those. Let me see. Leave only numbers to represent the brand of bike. So if I look down here in the challenge at the desired output, it looks like there are no slashes there. So I can come back into my model field. So now that the numbers are gone, I'm going to click more options again. I'm going to go to clean again, and I'm going to click remove punctuation. And that gets rid of my slashes. So now I've only got letters in there. So if I look, I mean, again, I can take a look over here at the calculation to see what's happening, which is some regular expressions. But those really complicated fields, all of those numbers and all that stuff, with 2 clicks, they're gone. Awesome. We've got our cleaned up model field. The next step, work out the order value using value per bike and quantity. Okay, work out the order value using value per bike and quantity. Okay. Value per bike. I see. Okay, so our data set is showing us for each order the quantity in the value of the individual bikes, but we need to know the total amount for the order. So that's easy. We just need to create a calculated field that takes our quantity and multiplies it by our value per bike to give us our order value. So let me create a calculated field here. I'm going to come up to the top right here, the third option, create calculated field. We'll call this order value. And so this is kind of our first calculation that we're actually having to type out. And so again, we want the value of the order, which is just the value per bike times the quantity. So value per bike times quantity gives us our order value. And you'll notice I'm not doing sum of value per bike times sum order quantity, because kind of like we talked about during the aggregation session, every calculation that you create is applied at the row level. In Tableau Desktop, everything is aggregated based off of what you have in the view. But here, we don't have a view. We don't have any type of way we're trying to aggregate the data set here. So all of our calculations are going to be applied at the row level. And so the value per bike is going to be, like in this first row down here, it's going to be 1,500 times 4. So save there. And now I've got my new order value column. Options come automatically when we click through this. All right, so now that we've done that, let's see what our next step is. Aggregate the value per bike, the order value, and the quantity by bike and bike type to form the quantity sold, the order value, and the average sold per brand and type. Okay, so it wants us to take value for bike, bike order, and the quantity by brand and by bike type, so that way we can get an average. What we're really looking for is this average sold per brand and type. And so we need to do some aggregation now. So we just talked about things being applied in the row level, but we want to aggregate. So let's pull in an aggregate step. But before we do that, actually, I'm going to rename this just to make it clear what's happening here. Since in this step, what did we do? We removed some numbers, we removed some punctuation, and we created an order value. So we'll say, I mean, we can just, instead of calling it clean one, we can just call it clean, right? And for the description, we'll say remove the numbers and punctuation from the model field. It looks like, do I need to rename this? Ah, yes. So clean the model field to leave only letters to represent the brand. So I need to rename that field real quick. So the model field that we cleaned up, this we renamed brand. Okay. So we removed the numbers and punctuation, renamed the field to brand. Then we calculated the order model, or the order value, calculate order value multiplying quantity with value per bike. Boom. There's our description of exactly what's happening in this step. All right. And so now I'm going to add a step, and I'm going to add an aggregate because we need to do some aggregation. Don't worry about where I'm placing stuff on the screen. That's just me. The shape of the flow doesn't matter at all. I just like to make it look certain ways on my screen. Which field did we rename as brand? We renamed the model field. So previously, this field was model. We renamed it to brand. I also see a question. If you have multiple outputs, can you consolidate those outputs into one Excel workbook? Yes, you can. I'll show that here in a second. So in the aggregate step, our prompt is telling us to aggregate the value per bike, order value, quantity by bike, or aggregate those three fields, value per bike, order value, and quantity, by brand and bike type. So in order to do that, we've got our grouped fields on the left, we've got our aggregated fields on the right. And so there was three fields it wants to aggregate. We need to aggregate order value. So I'm going to grab it from the left side and drag it to aggregated fields. We wanted to aggregate quantity. So I'm going to drag that from the left side over to aggregated fields, and value per bike. Drag that from the left side over to aggregated fields. And it wanted us to do this by brand and bike type. So we're grouping it by brand and bike type. So I'm going to take brand over here, drag it to grouped fields, and I'm going to take bike type and drag it to grouped fields. And so now what this is doing is it's saying for this brand and bike type, so for Oro mountain bikes, the aggregated order value is 206,000. The aggregated quantity is 87, and the aggregated value per bike is 66,706. And if I wanted to, I could come up here and change the actual type of aggregation that's happening. So by default, it chose sum, but I could change that to average or count or whatever here. So let me look at my prompt one more time. And so it says for one of them, average value sold per brand and type. Okay, so here what's happening right now is we're aggregating the value per bike, but we are looking for the average value sold per brand and bike type. So I can change the aggregation here from sum to average. And so now this is showing me the average sale amount for each bike for this brand and bike type. Okay. Now I can't, unfortunately, I'm not sure exactly why this is a thing, but I can't rename this column in the aggregate step. I have to do that in the next step. But what I can do right now is at least change the name of my step here. So I'm going to call this ag by brand and type. And then I'm going to say I aggregate the average value per bike, quantity, and order value by brand and bike type. All right. Let me look at my things here. It looks like that's it. So all I need to do here is just rename my field. So I'm going to add a clean step now. And since this was average value per bike, I'm going to call this average bike value sold per brand, comma, type. So average bike value sold per brand, comma, type. This was originally called value per bike. We've changed it now to average bike value sold per brand, comma, type. Do I need to do anything else? Quantity. Okay. The quantity based on our prompt here looks like the quantity field becomes quantity sold. So I'm going to take quantity and just add sold there. And is there anything else I need to do here? I know I'm skipping ahead on my prompt here, but it does say to round any averaged values to 1 decimal place. It's weird. So this, whenever we aggregate in prep, it's trying to be as explicitly accurate as possible. So we want to round this to one value. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to click the average bike value per sold or per brand. I'm going to create calculated field. So that's going to automatically bring it into my calculation here. And kind of what I talked about, changes being applied in order. So I can actually create a calculation here that's called the same thing, average bike value sold per brand, comma, type. So you can see I'm calling it the exact same thing. And I'm going to say round to, oops, I'm going to round this to 1 decimal place. It says my calculation is valid. So again, I'm taking the average bike value sold per brand, comma, type. I'm renaming this, or I'm calling this calculation the same exact thing, but I'm wrapping it in a round function to 1 decimal place. And so when I click save, you can see instead of it creating a new duplicate column and me having to go back and remove the column I was referencing, it allows me to replace the same calculation all in one step. So now this column, if I go back one step, you can see here, it's got all of my decimals. Once that calculation is applied, it replaces itself. So just ways to simplify, duplicate columns, the process as you're working through it. Perfect. And so we'll call this step here, rename and round. So rename the value per bike and quantity fields, round the average value per bike to 1 decimal. And this turns into my first output, which was sales by brand and type. That's what the first output is called, sales by brand and type. So I'll call this sales by brand and type. Oops. And so there was a question about combining separate outputs into the same Excel file. So one way that I could do that, my output here is set to file. I'm going to call this, again, the same thing. So sales by brand and type. The output type here, I'm going to change to, right now, by default, it's going to be a Tableau hyperfile. So I'm going to change it to Microsoft Excel. When I do that, there's a second menu that pops up for worksheet. So if I'm outputting it to an Excel file that already exists, then I need to either choose which worksheet I want it to output to, or I need to create a new one. So here, I don't have one that exists right now. So I'm going to create a worksheet called sales by brand and type. And so you can even see it asks create new worksheet. I say yes. And the option right now, it's set to append to table. I'm just going to use create table, but you could do append to table to basically say, if this is a flow that's going to continue to run, as it runs every day, every week, it's going to just append those records to the end there. So I'm going to click create table. I'll leave it on append to table actually. So now when this flow runs, it's going to output to an Excel file in the sales by brand and type sheet in that Excel file. Let me see. Perfect. And actually, you know what? I'm actually just going to call, I'll have to do something with the file here in a second, but we'll handle that in a minute. So there's still more stuff we got to do in this challenge. There is, we need to calculate the days to ship by measuring the difference between when an order was placed and when it was shipped. All right. This is also going to be a second input. So you can see down here on the desired input, it wants 2 files. One is the one we just created, sales by brand and type. The second input is going to be sales by brand and store, which this one contains values, the total values by store, also with days to ship. So that's what we're going to work on next. And I had a question about the round function. This is what that function looks like. Let me go back here real quick. The round function is just you say round, open parentheses, you put in the field that you're rounding, and then comma, and the number of decimals that you're rounding it to. All right. So we want days to ship by store. I'm going to, since this branch here, this branch of my flow handled the value per bike and bike type, I'm just going to create a new branch that handles my days to ship. So coming from this same cleaning step, because I still need these, the models to be cleaned up, I still need all of this stuff to happen. I'm just going to create a new branch starting from this clean step. So I click plus here, and I'm going to click aggregate. And what did we want to do? We wanted to aggregate where'd it go? Calculate days to ship. And then we also need to aggregate the order value quantity, days to ship by brand and store. Okay. So we need to calculate the days to ship before we aggregate. So we can actually aggregate those days to ship here in this first clean step. So I'm going to click on this first clean step. We've got order date. We've got shipping date. We want days to ship. So I'm going to create calculated field, call this days to ship. And we're going to use a date diff function. So we'll say date diff. And then you can see we need our date part. So we want days. So I'll say single quote day, single quote. So we want the difference in days between our start date, which would be order date, and our end date, which would be ship date. And so again, I'm trying to calculate my days to ship. So I need to use the date diff, so the difference, and then what date part day, so the difference in days from my order date to my shipping date. All right. Cool. So now we can see here, we've got our column with days to ship. And so actually I can now kind of change this description here. Again, I could have split this into a separate step. This is again, where it kind of is all about what's easier for you. Technically, I don't need days to ship here in this flow. I really only need it in this bottom flow. And so another thing I could have done is I'm going to right click and I'm going to copy this calculation. And I'm going to, instead of doing that calculation here, you can see when I hover over the line, it kind of gives me this plus option to add a step in between these two. So I can click here. Oops. I can add a clean step in here, and I can do days to ship here. So I'm going to paste that calculation that I copied, and I'm going to come back into this step and remove it from here. So we talked about kind of splitting things out, making it easier, more traceable. So I did not need days to ship here. So maybe I don't need that to be calculated in here. Maybe I only need it to be calculated down here. So I can say calculate the days to ship using date diff for order date and ship date. All right. And I can even change the colors here if I wanted to. There's a whole, color theory is its own thing in Tableau Prep too. You can kind of use that to your advantage to help you understand flows and it kind of group things, right? So I could make this the same color. What is this, yellow or is this orange? It's orange. I can't see that color for some reason. Amanda, yeah, older versions of Prep did allow you to rename in the aggregate step. I think in 2021.1, is when they changed it to where you can't rename in the aggregate step. And I think the reason for that is there was some errors. Like if you aggregated something and renamed it in the same step, sometimes it would give you errors and it like wouldn't aggregate properly based on the way that when prep compiles all of the SQL in the background, it would just cause errors. So I think they figured the easiest fix was to just not allow renaming in the aggregate step. Jeremy, how did I move that step out? So if you hover on the gray line, it gives you the little plus button in the middle of the line instead of like at the start of a step. So you can hover here, click, and add a step here in between. All right, so we calculated days to ship here. That's all this step is doing. And so now we can do our aggregation. So what does it say again? We want to aggregate total quantity sold, total order value, and average days to ship. And we want to aggregate that by brand and store. Cool. So we know what we're grouping by. We're grouping by brand and store, and then we're aggregating order value, quantity, days to ship. So now I'm in my aggregate step. I'm going to group by brand, drag that to my grouped fields. Going to drag store to my grouped fields. And then I'm going to take total order value. So take order value, drag that to aggregated fields. It's going to automatically be sum. So this is my total order value by store and brand. Was quantity one? Yeah, total quantity sold. I'm going to take quantity, drag that to aggregated fields. It is a sum. So this is my total, the sum of my quantity by store and brand. And then the last thing it wants is average days to ship. So I can take days to ship, drag that over here, click on where it says sum, change that to average. So now this is my average days to ship. So I'll call this ag by brand and store. We'll say aggregate the total order value, total quantity sold, and average days to ship by brand and store. Perfect. And I know this, as you start describing things, adding long descriptors to what's each step, what's happening, it can start to look busy. Now you can also, if you wanted to, as you're working through it, if you're getting too distracted by all the descriptions, you can click on the little comment icon and it will hide those descriptions. Now, one thing to keep in mind though, it's really, obviously these descriptions can help you if you step away from the flow and come back a couple weeks or a couple months later to try and remember what you were doing. But if the intent of the descriptions is for somebody to be able to look at your flow and understand what's happening, when you publish a prep flow to your server or your Tableau Cloud instance, users that have access to that location can look at the prep flow. But if they don't have edit access, like if you're only providing them access to look at the flow so they can see what's happening, they're going to see whatever is here. They won't have the ability to hide and show the comments. So if you publish it with all of these hidden, this is what they're going to see. And so you'll still kind of have to explain to them what is happening in each of these steps. So just keep that in mind if you're going to hide or show those descriptions. All right. So we need to add a clean step here to rename our fields. So we need to rename days to ship to average days to ship. We need to rename quantity to total quantity sold, I believe. Yes, total quantity sold. And we need to rename order value to total order value. The last thing we need to do based on our prompt is round any values to 1 decimal point. So again, we'll take average days to ship, create a calculated field, create a new calculation called the same thing, average days to ship. And we'll say round, open parentheses, the field that we're going to round, comma, 1 decimal point. And that's going to replace that field with my rounded field. And so I will call this rename and round. Rename the quantity, order value, and days to ship fields, round days to ship to 1 decimal. And, oops. And then we will add our output here at the end. What is this called here? They called it sales by brand and store. We will call this sales by brand and store. And then again, going back to how do we combine these in one Excel file. So here, when this outputs, it's going to output to a file called sales by brand and type. And it's going to output to the worksheet sales by brand and type. Now, I think because I haven't actually created this file yet, this is probably going to give me an error, but let me see, sales by type. Microsoft Excel, we'll call this sales by brand and store. Perfect, there it goes. So what I did here, so this is going to output to a file, an Excel file called sales by brand and type, but it's going to output to the worksheet called sales by brand and store. And so if I come back to my first output, this is outputting to an Excel sheet called sales by brand and type, or an Excel workbook called sales by brand and type, but a worksheet called sales by brand and type. So in fact, I could simplify this by just calling the worksheet or the workbook, it's the sales workbook. Come back here, so we're outputting both of these to a Excel workbook called sales, but this is going to its own sheet called sales by brand and store, and this is going to its own sheet called sales by brand and type. So it does allow you to do that, to output multiple outputs to the same Excel file, just in different sheets. Cool. And that is week 2. Done. Any questions on this one?
Yeah, nothing I can see, Jared. I think there are no questions specific to week 2 over here.
So
Yeah.
we've got, if you've been following along, you've now built 2 prep flows. And again, we're reinforcing some of these things, right? Like still using a lot of the quick and easy click cleaning functions, but now starting to go into the realm of aggregation and calculated fields and multiple outputs. Sometimes the data load is getting too intensive and prep becomes very slow. Is there a workaround for it? Yes. The workaround is basically utilizing sampling more. I've talked to the product management team about this because I know it's an issue that comes up a lot. And I know the thought is like with Alteryx, when you use Alteryx, you can kind of run a flow, cache all of the data. And even if that process takes a while, but as you're building your flow, it's kind of working off of that cached data, and you can kind of apply those changes quicker, right? Prep is doing that with data sampling. So if you come over here to your input step and you click on data sample, by default, it looks at the size of your data set and tries to take a reasonable sample that's going to allow you to make sure your cleansing is happening properly, but also is remaining performant. But if you're still running into that issue where it's giving you too much, like your computer is getting really bogged down with what it's trying to do, then you could limit it to a fixed number of rows. So let's say you know exactly what you need to do to the data, you know exactly how you want to clean it, and so you don't need to do as much during validation as you're building it out. You could say, I want to sample a fixed number of rows over here, and I'm going to limit it to 1,000 rows, right? And so that would help you get a more performant or at least faster processing time as you're working through it. And you can also toggle back and forth between, like, let's say you limited it, applied all of your changes, and once you did all of your cleaning steps, you were like, okay, now I want to go back and validate. Then you could come back and either click back on default sample amount, or you could click use all data. Let's see. Mention commonly used data sampling methods. So the way that it works, so the sampling method down here, quick select and random sample. So quick select here, as it says, so returns a requested number of rows, but it's not doing any, it's not really analyzing the shape of your data. So quick select, basically, whenever Tableau looks at the size of the file, it kind of determines in the background how much data it should sample. It's doing that by the number of rows. Like, it's just going to say basically like select top 100,000 rows is essentially what's happening in the background with quick select. With random sample, that one is actually looking at your entire data set, looking at the distribution of values in that data set, and then trying to provide a sampling of those specific, trying to keep the shape of your data the same in your sample. So that's why it says more thorough, but may impact performance. When a text file has more than one separator, how can we separate it in prep and proceed? So I wonder if maybe you can do other here. No, maybe that might be how to do it. I've never had to dealt with that exact problem, so I might need to look into that and get you a better answer for the next session. But I will look into that. I imagine there must be some way to do it. Maybe not in the input step. Maybe like when you bring it in the input step, you still got some fields that need to be separated. You could probably handle that in the clean step, but I'll see if there's a way to handle that in the input step. All right, so we're chugging along. This is going a lot faster than I thought it would, or time is going faster than I thought it would. So I do at least want to try to get through the next 2 challenges. So we'll see if we can get that done. So I will go to week 3, and I'll post that link in the chat as well so everybody can follow along. All right, so 3rd week, we're getting into pivoting. So first we started out with just date conversion and splitting columns. Next we did some aggregation and rounding, and now we're going to do pivoting with aggregations. So it looks like we're also going to do unions. And let's see, we've got one Excel sheet. It has 5 tabs of data. So each tab looks like it's representing a store. The structure of the data is exactly the same in each worksheet, so that's good. So I guess first we'll start by inputting the data source. So we'll click the input data source. I'm going to click download here in the top right. That is downloading my Excel file. And so I'm going to open up Prep. I'm going to click Connect to Data here in the top left. And since this was a Microsoft Excel file, we can click Microsoft Excel. And for my downloads here, I will click that download there, the week 3 input. And you can see there is a difference here now between what we've been looking at. So now on the left side over here, there is 5 tables. So I'm connected to one input, right? There's one input This is my Excel input, but there are 5 tables in that one input. Let's see. So let's look at our requirements. First, we want to input the data source by pulling together all of the tables. So when we look here at our prep flow, remember I said if you're connecting to one table, right, then it will automatically pull in that table in the input step. But since this is a worksheet with, or a workbook with 5 different tables, 5 different sheets, it doesn't know which one to pull in first. So it leaves that decision up to us. It wants us, the requirements say, bring all of the tables together in the input step. So the way we would do that is we would just select one of these tables first. So I'm just going to select Birmingham because it happens to be the top one. And I'm going to select multiple files. And I'm going to select wildcard union. And so it's going to search in my downloads folder. So I can specify what directory I want it to search in, but it's going to automatically give me a directory of my table that I brought in the view. So this table is in my C drive, in my users folder, in my name folder, and then in my downloads folder. So that's why that's my options here. And it's going to include this file, and it can include sheets that are a specific pattern. So I could say, I could specify specific sheets in here, but what we want to do is we want to pull in all our sheets. So if I leave this blank, then you can see blank equals include all. So because I've got my sheets set to include and I'm leaving this field blank, it's going to include all of my sheets. And so you can see here, include sheets. That means it's telling me these are the 5 sheets that are going to be included in my wildcard union. And so when I click apply here, you'll see up in my input step, the table shows a little plus icon. So that's what signifies to me that a union is happening here. There's multiple sheets here. And so I'm just going to call this, instead of leaving it titled Birmingham, I'm just going to call this store sales, right? Just something that lets me know that this is kind of what's happening in this input steps. Can't see multiple files options. In 2022.2, the multiple files tab changed to tables. Yeah, there are some updates in 2022.2. I've been meaning to download that because they made improvements specifically to the wildcard union. I just haven't had a chance to download the new version to use those, but the functionality is still there. It's the same. I think they've added some new filters, like you can kind of apply some different filters there. But overall, what you want to do is just include all of the sheets from the workbook. So now that we've done that, we renamed our input step store sales. And here, let me zoom in here too. There we go. So what's the next step? It says to pivot new columns and union multiple tables and not wildcard union. Yeah, I'll get that downloaded so that way we've got it for reference for the next session, because I know they made some changes to that wildcard union. The next step is pivot new columns and existing columns. Okay, so if I click view clean data or view and clean data to kind of take a look at my data here. So we've got a couple of columns titled new dash and then the product, and then a couple of columns titled existing dash and then the product. So what they want us to do is they want us to pivot all of these 4 columns into one, and then all of these 4 columns into one. And so that's made super simple for us. And I'm just going to go ahead and rename this. I'm not doing anything in this step other than previewing the data. So I'm just going to call this step preview, just to let us know that there's nothing happening here. It's just a step where I can look at the data and preview it. I'm going to add a new step, and it wants us to pivot. So I'm going to click pivot. And by default, it's going to be on pivot columns to rows here. You can switch that to pivot rows to columns, but we need to pivot these 4 columns into one column. So that would be pivoting these into rows, and also indicated by the icon here. So you can see we've got multiple columns. It's pivoting them into one column as rows. And so what we can do here is we can use a wildcard search to pivot. So I can click here, and it's going to tell me what value, right? The search bar, what do I want to wildcard pivot? And so I'll say new. Let me make sure that nothing else says new. Perfect. So I can say new. And so you can see here, it's got the pivot names. So whenever you do a pivot step, it automatically generates a new column called pivot names. And so now my new column is showing me the quantity, and the pivot one names is showing me like the actual product type. And so we'll clean this up in a second. But another thing that we want to do is we want to pivot the existing products as well. And so you can see here, there's this little plus icon right here to add more pivots in the same step. And so I can click add here. I'm going to use a wildcard search. And let me see, hold on. And you know what? Actually, I don't think this is going to do what I want it to do. Okay. Let me, instead of pivoting on new, let me think of this real quick. I want to do, I want to pivot all of these columns into one. So I don't want 2 separate columns with new and existing. I want one column with both. So that's actually a little bit easier. Hold on, I'm going to remove this step real quick to redo it. So right click and remove here and re-add the pivot step. So I was looking at this, it looks like our desired data structure here is 3 fields. We've got product, quarter, and product sold. And so I don't actually want a bunch of separate columns. I want one column that takes all of these rows, right? All of my new and existing, and pivots those into one. So that's a little bit easier. In my search here, I can just type in the hyphen, and that pivots all of those products into one column. So now I've got those values there, and I've got the pivot one names representing my products. So let's real quick. So now that we've pivoted those, I need to, let me look at the data set here. It says split the former column headers to form a customer type and a product. Okay. So we can use the pivot names to do that. So existing and new would be our customer type. And then we've got bags, mudguards, saddles, and wheels as our product. And so I can click pivot one names here. I'm going to click custom split. And then I'm going to put my hyphen here in my text box. I'm going to say split off all fields and split. So now I've got 2 columns there. And so I can call this one customer type. Oops. What happened here? I can call this one product. Perfect. Oops. Sorry, that was the wrong field. This one. Product. And now I don't need pivot one names anymore. we've got customer type, we've got product. Pivot one values, I can rename this to product sold. Perfect. And I don't think I need the file paths here anymore. And so actually, whenever you do any type of union, right? Here in my preview step, you can see there was this file paths column that was generated. So this just lets me know which table did my data come from, but because it's all the same workbook, all of the values are the same here. So I don't actually need this file paths column. So here in my preview step, I'm going to go ahead and remove that. The reason I'm doing that in the preview step, thinking about how do I make sure as I'm building my flow, it stays performant, processing times are down. The earlier in my flow that I can remove things, filter things out, just cut down unnecessary data, the earlier I can do it, the better. So that's why here in my preview step, I removed that file paths. All right. So I think that's it here. So we'll call this step pivot new / existing. And in the description, I'll say use a wildcard pivot on both the new and existing columns with a hyphen to get one column. Split the pivot one names field to get the customer type and product. Perfect. And I can even add a description here in the input step, right? So we did a wildcard union here, so we can say union all store tables. Or I guess that's all that's happening. Union all the store tables, right? So we unioned the tables, we removed the file paths, and then we pivoted the new and existing columns based on the little hyphen. We split the new field that was generated into two. One is customer type, one is product, and then we renamed the pivot one values field to product sold. Perfect. Now what is it asking us to do? Now it says, yeah, rename the measure created as pivot product sold. Create a store column. Oh, I see. Okay, let me go back. Table names. So whenever we brought the data in, file paths was the Excel sheet, table names is the actual sheet that this data is coming from, but the table, the name of the table represents our stores. So we can just take the table names field and rename that to store. Perfect. Remove any unnecessary data fields. We already did that. Turn date into quarter. Okay, so I'm going to add a new step here, a new clean step, and it wants us to turn the date into quarter. Do I need to keep the original date? No, I don't. I just need a quarter. So I can just come here to the date field, click on that, click my three dots, convert date to quarter number. I'm going to rename date to quarter. I'm going to rename my step to convert dates or convert date. Convert the date field to a quarter number and rename. Done. All right. Now that I've done that, what's the next thing? We need to aggregate to form two separate outputs of the product, of the number of products sold. One is going to be aggregating by product and quarter. The other is going to be aggregating by store, customer type, and product. Okay. So we'll do one aggregate here, and it wanted us to aggregate by product and quarter. So we'll take group by, or take product and add that to group by, grouped fields. Take quarter and add that to grouped fields. And then product sold and add that to aggregated fields. And so again, this is saying for each group of product and quarter, aggregate the products sold. So for the product wheels in quarter 3, this was the total amount of products sold. And so we'll call this sales by quarter. Say, aggregate the total number of products sold by quarter. And we will add an output there. And we'll call this product quarter output. All right. And so it says that we needed to create 2 branches. So now we need another aggregate of store, customer type, and product. We still need everything that happened up from these 4 steps, but then afterwards we're creating a second output. So we'll add a step here, aggregate, and this one wants us to aggregate by store, customer type, and product. So we bring in store to grouped fields, customer type to grouped fields, product to grouped fields, and then we will bring product sold to aggregated fields. And so this will give us our total products sold by store. And so we can call this sales by store. And we'll say aggregate the total number of products sold by store and customer. Perfect. We'll add an output here. We'll call this customer product quarter output. Perfect. And it's going to give me the little error triangle because I've technically got them named the same thing, but we're not actually going to output the data, so that's okay. And that is challenge number 3, week 3. So the big change here, the big jump here was the pivot step. We pivoted the all of those 8 columns by using a wildcard pivot on that hyphen. And that gave us 1 column that we then split into 2. Can you quickly show how we can connect this to desktop? So there's a couple ways you can do that. If you're wanting to just output the 2 separate data sources to desktop or connect to them in desktop, you could. I'm clicking my output here, right? So I would click to a file. I'll just call this, I'll name this customer product order output. And so it by default, Prep is going to automatically output to your Prep repository. So you can see over here, the location says it should be in your documents, in your My Tableau Prep repository, in the data sources folder. So by default, everything should output there. And it's going to output as a Tableau hyperfile. And then so again, if I come down here and name this one product quarter output. Okay. And so because I named those, they're set to my Prep repository. If I come up here and click my play button, my run button, it's going to run everything. And so I could run my flows. You can see it generated 2 outputs, right? And I could open up desktop. Okay. Here, and because there's not an option for connecting to a hyperfile specifically over here, I would click more. And then so in your documents folder, you should have your Tableau Prep repository. And then there should be a data sources folder, and all of your hyperfiles will output here. So I can see my 2 product quarter output and customer, and I could connect to one of them as one data source, add a new data source, more. In my Prep repository in the data sources folder, I can connect to my other data source. So there you go. Isn't letting you change the name of the output. Oh, okay. So to change the name of the output, you have to change it here in the actual name field right here. If you try to click browse and then change the name here, so if I change this to output again and say accept, it's not going to actually change the name of the file. So when I click browse again, it's still called the name field. So you should be able to change the name here. If that's not the case, let me know. They might have changed that in more recent versions. Interesting. Does it let you change it if you click browse and change the name here and then click OK or accept? Ah, okay. So it looks like that was a change then. So it looks like in older versions, you have to click browse, change the name and click accept. But in newer versions, in at least 2022.1 and later, you have to change the name here in the name field. Perfect. For dashboard creation, is it fine to keep separate hyper outputs relevant to 2 to 3 views and multiple hypers? That is fine, especially like if you look at this data source for customer product, right? So we've got 4 columns and it's at a different level of granularity than the other data source. So the level of granularity here is customer, product, and store. So the sales by store, customer type, and product. Whereas in this other data source here, it's sales by product and quarter. So we've got 2 different levels of granularity here. So it is best to keep those as separate data sources. And yeah, you could create a dashboard where you've got different views on that dashboard referencing those different data sources. That's fine. Obviously, the more data sources you have, you're taking a little bit of a performance hit. So consolidating data sources where you can. But in this case, we've just got to work with these 2 data sources because of that. Sorry, excuse me. I suppose one thing you could do, instead of keeping the data sources separate, you could technically create a relationship, right? So here I've got a data source of the products, right, by customer type and store. So I could, instead of adding a new data source, I could add a connection, bring in my data source that's by quarter, and create the relationship there and say I want to create that relationship on product. And so now I've got, in one data source, I'm able to reference both of my different grains of data. So you could do it that way too, instead of keeping the data sources separate. All right. So we've got 15 minutes left. I don't know if we'll be able to get through the last challenge, but we'll at least start on it.
Maybe we can also direct everyone to go ahead and try themselves also, the next 2 challenges.
Yeah, so we can we can wrap up, see how much we can tackle on week 4. But then the other 2 challenges, the week 27 of 2022 and week 28 of 2022, now that we've been working through these together, you're getting the feel of it. Try your hand at those and see how far you can get on your own, kind of referencing the help documentation there, working through those. It's really satisfying to kind of be able to start completing those on your own. So I definitely recommend doing that. But with the time we've got left, I will try to go through this. And I don't want to rush through it because I do want to make sure we're absorbing things. So we'll get as far as we get in 15 minutes. Okay. So this one here is going to bring in joins. So we looked at, first we did some splitting and grouping. Then we did aggregations and calculations. Then we did pivoting, and now we're going to do joins. So again, just kind of compounding the skills that we're learning here. So the input file is pretty similar to the one we just did. So I'm going to go ahead and take that. I'm going to download it. Okay, so that got downloaded, and let me go back to my challenge and my requirements here. So let me open up a new instance of Prep. I'm going to connect to data. I'm going to click Microsoft Excel, go to my downloads, and I see week 4 input. And so if I look on the left over here, I've got my store tables, but I've also got one more. I've got a table called targets as well. So something to keep in mind here. So the first thing I want to do is I want to union the store data together. Okay. So I'm going to bring in Birmingham just because it's my first sheet here. I'm going to click on multiple files, or if you're working with the latest version, tables, right? Yeah. I'm going to click on wildcard union, or if you're working with the latest version, union multiple tables. And most of these options I'm going to leave the same, but since we've got that new targets sheet, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to actually, instead of saying include on sheets over here, I'm going to say exclude. And what pattern do I want to exclude? Well, I want to exclude the target sheet. So I'm going to enter target here. Oh, sorry, not target, it's targets. Enter targets. So there you go. So now you can see over here, I'm including 5 sheets. Each of those sheets is my store names, and I'm excluding the targets sheet. So exactly what I want to do. I will click apply. I'm going to zoom in up here on my canvas here to make it easier to see. So a little plus here tells me that it's unioned. And so I'm going to rename this to, I'll just call it sales. I'll call it store sales again. But this time I'm going to say wildcard union, bringing together all of my store sales together. Actually, bringing together all sheets from the Excel file, excluding the targets sheet. Perfect. All right. So what's the next thing I need to do? Let me look here. Remove unnecessary data and rename table names to store. Okay. I'm going to click a clean step here. So I don't need the file paths field. So I'm going to click that field and remove it. And I'm going to rename the table names field to store. All right. So I'm going to call this remove and rename. And since we're running low on time, I'm going to sort of skip the descriptions part. But, you know, they definitely help, as you've kind of seen us working through our process. As you describe things, it does familiarize you with the tool. And one way it helps me too is I kind of think through my steps, like when I create this step, how am I going to describe it? And so I apply those changes. It's a good way to help you through your own thinking. And then again, to as a refresher or just transparency on what's happening in the flow. Okay, so we removed those fields, we renamed. What's next? We want to pivot the product columns. Okay, so I'm assuming we want to, split the customer type into the customer type, product, and then the product sold. So the same thing that we just did in the previous challenge, right? So we're going to add a pivot step, and we want to pivot these new and existing columns into one. And so we're going to use a wildcard search to pivot. We're going to add the hyphen here in the text bar and press enter. That gives us 2 columns, pivot 1 names and pivot 1 values. And so we're going to take pivot 1 names. We're going to click that, use a custom split on the dash again. We want to split off all fields, split. Now we don't need the original column anymore, so I'm going to highlight it and click remove. I'm going to rename pivot one names split one to customer type, pivot one names split two to product, and pivot one values to products sold. Call this step pivot new / existing. Right? What's the next thing? Turn date into a quarter number. Okay, so the first 4 steps here are very, very similar to what we just did. So it's just kind of reinforcing those steps. So click clean step, go to the 3 dots next to date, convert dates into quarter number. We'll rename this to quarter and call this step convert date. Sum up the products sold by store and quarter. Okay. So that's pretty easy. So it wants me to aggregate. So I'm going to add an aggregate step. My products sold. So take products sold to aggregated fields. And it wants me to aggregate that by store and quarter. So I'm going to take store to grouped fields and quarter to grouped fields. And I'm going to call this sales by store and quarter. Perfect. Then it says add the target's data. So join the target's data with the aggregated stores data, and this should result in 20 rows of data. Okay. It also wants me to remove any duplicate fields formed by the join. So let's start by bringing in the targets. So here on the left side, I can click the targets table, drag that onto my canvas here. It popped up down here. And so I can see here when I click on the input step, I've got 3 fields. I've got quarter, store, and target. If I click over here in my aggregated step, I've got quarter, store, and product sold. And so what I want to do to bring these 2 together cleanly is I want to make sure that our target, since it looks like it's a quarterly target, that I'm comparing my products sold for the quarter against my target for the quarter, but I'm doing this at the store and the quarter level. So I want to join on both of those fields. Since I've got store and quarter in both of these, and that's the level of detail of both of these data sets, I want to join on those 2 fields. So I'm going to click this targets table, and I'm going to drag it over here and hover over my aggregate step until my 2 icons pop up, and I'm going to drop it onto join. And so now we've got a join happening here. And over here in my applied join clauses, you can see that it automatically detected quarter, but I also need it to join on the store as well. So I'm going to click the little plus icon here, and I'm going to also say I want to join on store. So store from the left side, and you can tell by the colors here, right? So the blue quarter is coming from my blue aggregate step, and then my yellow quarter is coming from my yellow targets table. So these visual indicators are still helping me keep track of which table is my left table, which table is my right table. So I'm saying store, the blue store from my left should join to the yellow store from my right. And now you can see down here in my summary of join results, I had 20 rows in both tables. And so my join result is 20 rows, exactly what it asked us. But you can see now in my join results, I also have some duplicated fields. So since I did a join, I did it on quarter and store. Both tables have the field quarter. Both tables have the field store. I don't need the duplicate ones, and you can tell which ones are duplicate by the parentheses and -1 next to the name. And so I'm going to click both of these. I'm going to hold control and click both of those and remove the fields. And so I'll call this join targets. Oops, I don't need that. All right. So that was our join, right? And so now what's the last thing it's asking us to do? calculate the variance between each store's quarterly actual sales and the target. Call this field variance to target. Okay. So if I click over here, add a clean step, now I'm going to create a calculated field and call this variance to target. And we're going to say product sold minus target. So this is going to give us our variance. What was our target? How far off were we from that target? So I'm going to click OK. So now we've got our variance to target here. And then what does it say? Rank the stores based on the variance to target in each quarter. The greater the variance, the better the rank. So it says rank the stores based on their variance to the target in each quarter, meaning every quarter we should have a store that's ranked 1 and a store that's ranked 5th. So the way we can do this is we can click, we want to rank the store. So let's click store. Let's click the little 3 dots button and let's click create calculated field, or come down to create calculated field and then come down to rank. So this pops up our visual editor. And so again, we are ranking our store, order by store. No, we do not want to calculate store. Scratch that. We want to calculate the rank based on the variance to target. So let's click variance to target. Click the 3 dots. Hover to create calculated field and hover to rank. There we go. So we're creating a rank calculation. What do we want to group it by? Well, we want every quarter to have unique rankings. So the rankings should restart every quarter. And so we want to group by quarter. And we want to rank it by the variance to target. And we want to do it in a descending order because the greatest variance is the highest rank. So you can see here in quarters 1, right? So every quarter, we should have 5 rankings. So we've got quarter 1 repeated 5 times. We've got ranks 1 through 5, and they're sorted in descending order from the greatest to the least. And you can see here also that every quarter, so quarter 2, they restart. Now, when I click done, I'm actually going to rename this real quick to rank. And the calculation, you can see the calculation that it created over here. And so partition by quarter, so restarting every quarter, order the rank in a descending order by variance to target. And there you go. That is challenge number 4. We made it. Made it with 1 minute to spare. So this is the good stuff right here. If you came in, we were able to join this session. Even if you missed the first 2 sessions, this is the real hands-on getting you familiar with the tool. So we will, so on Friday, we've got that quiz coming up. And so we're going to provide y'all with a data set, a simple data set to kind of clean up and answer some questions. And, you know, throughout this journey too, we've got the LinkedIn channel. Sagar, could you post that again real quick in the chat? If you haven't joined the LinkedIn channel, please join. So that way, if you've got any questions, if you get stuck on anything, if you need some help, we can answer that. We can help you with that. And so we can have this nice collaborative environment where we're all getting familiar with the tool together.
Yep. So I think thanks a lot, Jared. I have already gone ahead and posted a LinkedIn channel. So please go ahead and join it and wait for the quiz. I think Jared and I'll reach out to you in terms of the quiz. You have to go ahead and solve. And I hope the session was impactful. Thanks a lot, Jared, for keeping it interactive. Even I was doing it together. I think Tableau Prep has a real power. You have to just go ahead and get started using it. So yeah, thanks a lot, Jared, for this.
Thank you, everybody, for joining, and we'll regroup next time.